Good evening, everyone. This is Professor Based here with Based So Hard University. I'm coming to you on Sunday evening, July 14th, 2024. And obviously, the big news of the weekend was that there was an assassination attempt made on Donald Trump yesterday in Pennsylvania at a rally he was giving. I think most of us are informed about it, but he was shot at. I believe the assassin got off 5 rounds or so, and he was actually struck in the ear. And miraculously, only by the grace of God, no other word for it, did he survive another centimeter over, and we'd be living in a very different world right now. And that really, that 1 centimeter there is the difference between where we are now and, frankly, very, very dangerous times that we could be heading into. And to be honest, inch or not, we are in dangerous times already. Joe Biden gave a speech tonight in which, and many other Democrats throughout the weekend have given generic statements in which they, quote unquote, condemn political violence, say that political violence has no place in American discourse. This is, of course, laughably absurd, laughably hypocritical. Not only have these people outright called for political violence in many cases, we can go right down the list: Maxine Waters, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer. All of these people have directly or indirectly called for political violence. And they've not only called for it, but they have thrown the weight of the Democratic Party behind people who cause political violence. So, in the case of Kamala Harris, she set up a bail fund to fund out violent rioters during the BLM riots in Minneapolis several years ago. The Department of Justice, Biden's Department of Justice, ignored federal statute, ignored the federal law, and allowed quote unquote protesters, to demonstrate out in front of the homes of Supreme Court justices after the Dobbs decision. Again, this flies directly in the face of federal law. That was no matter. They could intimidate Supreme Court justices, so they did it. And of course, eventually a man came to kill Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh. Luckily, he was arrested before he was able to do that, but he put the justice and his entire family at risk. And again, it was more than just Kavanaugh. All of the justices were at risk. And so there's this kind of desperate both sidisms that we're seeing. Both sides must tone down the rhetoric. Both sides must tone down the violence. But the fact of the matter is 99% of the political violence in this country comes from one side. The BLM riots, of course, famously in 2020, were the most destructive riots this country's ever seen. But let's not pretend like the BLM riots were confined to 2020. They took place in 2020 or 2012. 2014, 2016. For years, anytime there was any kind of incident between a black criminal, 99% of the time, and a police officer, the left agitated riots from Ferguson to Florida to, again, Minneapolis. We've seen them in Baltimore in the Freddie Gay case. We've literally seen them in dozens of cities across the country. And they've only ceased with the Biden administration. But let me assure you, the next time there's a Republican president, they will be out in full force burning the country down again. I mentioned the Kavanaugh assassination, and it wasn't just the Kavanaugh assassination. It was the intimidation of all the Supreme Court justices. Rand Paul was attacked in his home, I believe the front yard of his home while he was doing the yard work. Had 6 ribs broken, was put in the ICU. Bernie Sanders, a Bernie bro, went and shot up a Republican congressional baseball practice with the intention of killing a lot of Republican congressmen so they could, overturn the Republican control of the House. Yesterday's attempt on Donald Trump's life We've, Elon Musk came out with, they've apparently been several attempts on his life. This has been going on and on for well over a decade. I mean, we could go back to the 1960s and the Weather Underground. They scream and holler now about the sanctity of the house. Oh, how could they ever, the January 6 people, how could they ever walk through the house of the people's house, But they detonated a bomb, the Weather Underground did, in the 1960s, I believe, or it might have been 1970 by that point. They detonated a bomb. And what happened? Bill Clinton pardoned them. And what happened? Those people grew up to take important positions in academia. And what did they do? They mentored Barack Obama. So the idea that they're against violence is laughable. They're against, you're defending yourself against their violence as what really gets them in a stir. What Kyle Rittenhouse defending himself, being attacked by rioters who had criminal records for abuse of women and children. Again, they harp on January 6th as if it was some kind of, again, insurrection without a weapon in sight. The only person dying that day, I believe actually there were a couple people that died that day that were protesters who were protesting against an illegal and fraudulent election, which they had every right to do. Ashley Babbitt was shot down in cold blood. So political violence is already here, and it's going to grow in the future. I'm almost certain of that. And eventually, there will be a legitimate response from the right, an organized response from the right, and not just a bunch of old ladies shuffling through Statuary Hall, minding the velvet ropes, but a true organized response from the right. And God help us when it comes. And so, of course, I'm not the first pundit to make the connection, but a lot of what's happening now is very similar to the lead up of the first American Civil War. Now, I believe there's no Civil War coming. Any new Civil War will not look like the old Civil War. There will not be secession. There will not be a confederation of states. That's very unlikely and very, very far into the future, even if something like that were to happen. But mass civil violence in the streets, that seems to, again, already be here. It's been one-sided so far. When the other side comes, it will be very dangerous. And it reminds me, of course, of John Brown. What all those leftist violence that I just alluded to share in common with John Brown is they were all sure they're doing God's work. To commit this kind of violence requires you to have the belief that you are on God's side. Of course, these atheists and these Marxists don't talk about God anymore. What do they talk about? The right side of history, right? Of course, they're on the right side of history, completely swallowing down Marxist idea of this historical imperative. But for those who don't know, and I would hope most of us do, but this is an education channel, so we'll go over it very briefly. But John Brown was an American abolitionist. He was born in New England. Again, deeply religious man. And he saw himself, to quote him, as an instrument in the hands of God to end American slavery. That took many forms. It started out with him preaching in churches, and it soon escalated into real-world violence, not least of which in Kansas, bleeding Kansas, again, in the lead-up to the Civil War, in which there was civil violence in Kansas between abolitionists and slavery, pro-slavery factions. So he participated in these kinds of, straight up guerrilla warfare. And after doing that, he most famously raided Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry is on the border of what is now West Virginia and Maryland. At the time, it was Virginia still. Of course, West Virginia did not split off until after the Civil War had been declared. So, this was before the Civil War. and took place in 1859. So right before the Civil War, October 1859. And so again, Harper's Ferry is right on the Potomac River there, between West Virginia and Maryland. And so John Brown basically tried to instigate a slave revolt. He chose Harper's Ferry because it was right on the border there, but also because there was a military arsenal there. And so his plan was to arouse the slaves, take over the arsenal, arm them, and then just start basically killing all the whites they could find, not just slave owners, but any white, including civilians. That was the plan. Again, when you have God on your side, or in this case, history on your side, right? You are bound by no morality, no moral rules to your violence. The slave revolt was put down after a few days. Forces were sent out under the command of, ironically enough, Robert E. Lee. So Robert E. Lee led United States forces, Union forces. Of course, nobody called them as such at the time, and put them down. Amongst Robert E. Lee's command was Stonewall Jackson and Jeb Stuart, who later both became obviously prominent generals for the Confederacy during the war. Another little interesting fact of history is that John Wilkes Booth Brown was executed for his crimes, which again included murder. But John Wilkes Booth came out from, I believe he was in Baltimore at the time, or Maryland at least, largely, and he came out to witness the execution. And so, John Brown perpetrated this violence just 2 years before the war, not even a full 2 calendar year before the Civil War broke out. And he was seen as, in the words of Herman Melville in a poem that we're about to take a look at, he was seen as the Meteor of the war. He was the Portent, the title of the poem, meaning he was the signal that the war was coming. And again, when we look at these violence acts now, I believe we can see the same portents and the same signs and the same meteors of yet another war to come, yet another round of civil violence for America. So again, we're going to take a quick look at a poem here written by Herman Melville. But let's first just, again, an educational channel. So let's get a little background on Herman Melville here. So Herman Melville was an American writer, novelist, short stories, poems. Born in 1819, died in 1891. So he's about 40 when the war broke out. So really in the prime of his creative life. His short story was at Bartleby the Scrivener. Famous, a lot of, if you have a decent education, of course, in the 21st century, so few children are given one, but you would have come across that probably in middle school. And he's most famous, of course, for his novel, Moby Dick, which he published in 1851. So he was only 30, or 31 or 32 when he published Moby Dick, which is quite an accomplishment. So Moby Dick is often put in that category of, quote unquote, the great American novel. Moby Dick, Huckleberry Finn, and The Great Gatsby are probably the 3 novels that are most associated with that title, the great American novel. And what that really means is that not only are they great novels, but they reveal something about the American character. And so in Moby Dick's about Captain Ahab. And Captain Ahab is a whaler, and he's on a quest, one of vengeance, to kill Moby Dick, which is a giant white whale, a giant white sperm whale that has bit off his leg at a prior encounter. And so Ahab takes on this kind of tragic figure in that he is driven on this quest that he can never quite obtain. And in his quest, his reaching, his aspiration to get something that he never quite can, he becomes a tragic figure and is destroyed by that again, quest or search. And it's you can see pretty direct parallels to The Great Gatsby and Jay Gatsby's. Obviously, a very, very different novel. But, Jay Gatsby, in the same way, his quest for Daisy, his desire for Daisy, leads him to, again, desire and reach out for something that he can't ever quite obtain. And in that search, he is destroyed and becomes a tragic figure. And so Melville, again, prime of his life leading into the Civil War, reacted to John Brown's execution by writing a poem called The Portent. And the portent meaning a portent is a symbol of something to come, a symbol of something bad and dangerous to come, a warning almost. And so let's take a look at the poem here. Hanging from the beam, slowly swaying, such the law. Gaunt the shadow on your green, Shenandoah. The cut is on the crown, lo, John Brown, and the stabs shall heal no more. Hidden in the cap, in the anguish none can draw, so your future veils its face, Shenandoah. But the streaming beard is shown, weird John Brown, the meteor of the war. And so first, my apologies. I'm not much for reciting poetry. As I've told students in the past, the only good thing actors are the only thing actors are good for is their ability to recite poems. Otherwise, they're quite a useless creature. Unfortunately, I don't have that talent. I specifically think of the word here, Shenandoah. He's meaning to rhyme it here with what? Law and draw. And my southern accent doesn't do it justice. He was a New Englander, so he meant law and Shenandoah. So he meant the word to be pronounced in that kind of pak the ka and ha the jod New England kind of accent. But just take a look at the poem in a little more detail here real quick. So hanging from the beam, slowly swaying. So this is John Brown's body being hung in execution for his crimes. Gaunt the shadow on your green, Shenandoah. And so Shenandoah is the valley in northern Virginia that essentially separated Virginia from Maryland, separated the north from the south. The cut is on the crown, lo, John Brown. And so the cut is on the crown. John Brown had been wounded when they had arrested him. He had been struck by a sword. And so he had a cut on his forehead, the crown of his forehead. And the stab shall heal no more. So the wound on John Brown will not heal anymore because he's dead. His body has stopped regenerating. But the same is true of the nation. The wounds between the North and the South will not heal anymore. There is no more compromise. There's no binding the Union together anymore. The breach is irrecoverable. Hidden in the cap, in the anguish none can draw. So hidden in the cap, his face is covered. He's wearing a hood as they would when they executed people. And the anguish none can draw. So, that is done so that obviously the face would not be seen in the moment of death. And it's, again, it's incommunicable. You can't communicate that moment of death. It can't be drawn. It can't be spoken. It can't be shared. So your future veils its face. So we won't see John Brown as he goes into his death. In the same way, again, for the nation, we won't, the nation's future is hidden, is covered. We know something bad's coming, but we don't know the extent of it. And ultimately, nobody did. They went into the Civil War. Nobody had the idea. I mean, Herman Melville might have had a pretty good clue, but the politicians in the media, the chattering classes, thought it would be a very short and often bloodless war. And of course, 600,000 Americans died. It was anything but. But the streaming his beard is shown, weird John Brown. So if you've seen pictures of John Brown, his one of his distinguishing features is this long, unkempt beard he has. So this hangs below the hood that they have put on him, and we can still see it. And here we are, weird John Brown. Weird in the idea of double meaning here, both strange. He is a strange man. If you've even seen pictures of John Brown, just his eyes show his eccentricity. He was an odd, strange man. But also weird in the sense of the way that Shakespeare used weird for the three sisters of Macbeth. Again, a portent, a dangerous, strange, weird thing that was a sign of danger, a sign of death, a sign of decay. And then finally, the last famous line, the meteor of the war. And they don't use meteors, we might in the modern sense, to mean something flashing and brief across the sky, but rather, again, a portent, a sign of something dangerous to come, of God's wrath to be spilled out upon the earth. And so, again, this is Herman Melville's The Portent, about John Brown's execution and the coming war. And so, here I sit on July 14th, 2024, and I'm no great, to my great chagrin, to my great disappointment, I am not Herman Melville. I'll never write Moby Dick. I don't believe I'll ever write anything even as good as The Portent here. All I can do is, make my little podcast video here. But I'm struck with the same feeling that Herman Melville was in 1859 when he looked at John Brown's hanging body. And I see, the picture of Trump's would-be assassin, Thomas Matthew Crooks, with his brain blown out of his head, blood running down his face, the result of a Secret Service counter sniper taking him out. And I can't help but feel a portent, a dangerous sign. I felt the same way when I saw Kyle Rittenhouse shooting those women abusers and pedophiles and communists in Kenosha, Wisconsin, I guess it was. The same way where I see, Rand Paul, hobbling with broken ribs. Steve Scalise shot at a softball practice by some Bernie bro Marxist leftists. These are the meteors of what is coming. I don't know what's coming. Violence is coming. Blood is coming for this nation. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'm filled with a foreboding. Not to mix metaphors, but I think of Enoch Powell, the English politician, when he was talking about, when he gave his famous speech, The Rivers of Blood. He said he saw England's future with a foreboding, as a nation heaping up its own a funeral pyre. And I believe that's where we are here as the United States of America, heaping up our own funeral pyre. And I'm not here to both sides this. This violence almost exclusively comes from the left. It almost exclusively comes from the Marxists in this kind of cultural revolution that's been happening in this country for, the last 10, 12, 14 years. But all I would say to people is, let us, as Lincoln said, let us appeal to the better angels of our nature. But I don't think, if it wasn't, it's the same thing with John Brown. It's the same thing with Lincoln. If it wasn't Lincoln, it would have been another man. If it wasn't John Brown, it would have been another man. If it wasn't this, Thomas Matthew Crooks, it would have been another man. These are forces of history. Individuals mean nothing. And individuals are but flotsam and jetsam in the currents of history. And so let us pray, but I'm not sure what good it's going to do. And so, again, if you look up, it's here it is Sunday night. If you look up in the sky here in northern Texas where I am, I believe you can see the meteors of war flashing before our eyes, signaling dangerous times to come.